So I did a live on this, but I thought it might be worth summarizing in a more truncated format. When it comes to JuJu Watkins comparisons to Caitlin Clark, really they're a compliment to Caitlin Clark if you think about it. Now, let me first address this idea that JuJu Watkins is not promoted at the level Caitlin Clark was. That's just false. Caitlin Clark wasn't promoted until organically she became so popular. JuJu Watkins, I'd argue, has been promoted far more than Caitlin Clark was relative to where she was in her college career, which, by the way, is a great thing. That shows the growth of the game. That is awesome and amazing. And so are these comparisons because they show you that, women's basketball is starting to be talked about, the way basketball is just talked about and argued about and bantered about. Player comparisons happen. And it also shows you that whether people want to admit it or not, they see Caitlin Clark as the standard, both from a notoriety standpoint and really from an ability standpoint. So the only time I ever have problems with the comparison is when they're used to discredit anybody, when it's used to try to tear down Caitlin Clark or say no one else, should ever be mentioned with Caitlin Clark, what have you. Juju is worth it. She's proven it. She's the best prospect since Caitlin Clark. She can score from every level on the floor. She's been awesome and deserves the National Player of the Year. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark, went into the WNBA and dominated. Until anybody does that, they don't stack up comparison-wise when they're still in college, especially given what Clark is able to do as a playmaker, which she probably doesn't get enough credit for. But when it comes to the comparisons themselves, I don't see the downside. It just shows you women's basketball continues to rise. That's really all there is to it there, right? Caitlin went to the Iowa game and praised Juju. Said you're great. She said it on the microphone after the game. It's not as if Caitlin Clark has a problem with JuJu Watkins being praised or getting attention. Caitlin Clark has wanted to see the women's game grow. And I believe that Caitlin's legacy only grows the more the sport grows. Because, yes, it's silly to think that anyone else, is nearly close to as responsible. Caitlin Clark is the reason for the explosive growth in the game, right? Or certainly the dominant reason for the explosive growth in the game, both at the college level and the professional level. But this idea that everything always needs to be about her all the time, that's not healthy for the eventual growth of the sport. And I think she would tell you the same thing. Because, there's two sides of the same coin, right? There's the side of the coin where people are like, this player's so much better than Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark is overhyped. Caitlin Clark. And then there's the other side of like, no one will ever be Caitlin Clark. No one should be mentioned with Caitlin Clark. I mean, plenty of players were hyped to be Michael Jordan and didn't live up to it. I mean, the reason the LeBron James and Michael Jordan debate rages on is because of what LeBron James was able to do in his career. And you hope that there is, I don't know if there'll ever be a next Caitlin Clark from an impact standpoint, but a next Caitlin Clark from an ability standpoint, or at least to be put into that conversation. Rivalries and discussions and arguments help the game. You can say what you want about the Angel Reese mentions, but you can't say it's hurt the engagement of the WNBA. But if there was a more natural rival, both position-wise and I think, style of play wise and even head-to-head wise, that, with the next generation, or at least from the comparison of the heir apparent kind of deal, that would make sense too. Because, the WNBA is going to milk Angel and Caitlin forever, right? And so is the media. We already seen that. We already seen the games move. We've seen how many times they've scheduled this guy against the Fever. And it doesn't matter who Clark plays. We know she's going to sell out the building, but it doesn't hurt to have somebody on the other side. Like, there'll be more attention when they play the Aces too, because of Asia Wilson. Just like there's more. But when there's going to be guards coming in, because I think that's one of the things that Caitlin is also at the forefront of, this revolution when it comes to it not just being a big dominated sport. Because you go back and look through the history of the WNBA, you got like Taurasi and Cooper. but it's almost all bigs who have dominated. Almost all bigs. And now you're starting to see a shift where Paige Beckers is going to be the number one pick in the draft. And JuJu Watkins is surely going to be the number one pick in the draft. And Hannah Hidalgo is, a favorite of fans. And next to Juju, had the best case for National Player of the Year. I had Hannah in front for most of the year. Juju won me over as the year went on. That's why I reject this idea that it's a media generated thing, because I had Hannah above Juju. Juju proved to me she's the truth. So it's one thing if you get obsessive about it and just beat, it into the ground. Again, it's another thing if you also just disregard what Caitlin Clark accomplished or what Caitlin Clark does. People don't give Caitlin Clark enough credit for her finishing at the rim, which is elite, or her athleticism and strength and power, which is elite. Caitlin Clark is an elite athlete. Not to mention her playmaking and vision, which is genius level. I've never, man or woman, she's as good as anyone I've ever seen. She's up with the transcendent figures in that regard. But, some of the backlash to Juju is the hype, just like some of the backlash to Clark, I guess, was the hype. And I think it's earned and deserved. And in Juju's case, the same thing. She's proven she's earned and deserved it. And it's coming at an earlier time because of what Caitlin Clark did before. And then if you're not, if you're being honest about how great Clark is, and you're being honest about Juju's potential, I have no problem with comparing their games side by side. Now, Juju has to go do it at the WNBA level. Until then, it's moot. But I've got no problem with, saying, oh, okay, Juju's up next. Or Juju getting extra attention, because that's same with Paige too. Look, when was the last time the number one pick in the draft in the WNBA got celebrated like that? Obviously, Clark's draft class and Clark, and now Paige is going to get more attention than, I'm not saying more attention than Clark, but certainly more attention than the previous years before that. And the same goes for the build with Juju, and that's the advantage the women's college game has, that you get to follow these players and know their stories. But all of this is also about the legacy for Caitlin Clark, the women's game's growth. So comparisons to her are really a compliment, because it shows that Cece has set the standards.